Press Club. Also, we want to state that we have representatives from the 6th Congressional District here, Representative and former Governor Edwin Edwards, and we did invite Garret Graves as well to participate in a debate, and he declined. And we also invited him to send a representative, and he declined as well. But we're happy to have the former governor here. He really is a person that needs no introduction, but I'll tell you just a little bit. He served on the City of Crowley Council. He's a former Louisiana State Senator. He was elected to the United States Congress 4 times, and he also served as, of course, Louisiana Governor. He's the only 4-term governor in our history, and now he's running for 6th Congressional District. Please help me welcome former Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards.
Well, the night that the first election occurred on November the 4th, my opponent, who lucked out and ran second to me and first over the Republicans in the race, in a state of euphoria, told an admiring crowd to great applause and accolade that he was looking forward to the fight with Edwin Edwards, and he would take the fight to me and fight toe to toe. Well, when I heard that, I said, well, that's good. We'll have a civil debate on the issues and let the people decide who should represent them in Congress. However, he must have stumped his toe on the way to the debate because he hasn't shown up. But I'm here, and I want to say to this that he has chosen not to debate and instead to pursue a rather low-level method of campaigning, similar to what he did to poor Paul Dietzel in the first election by circulating false and scurrilous and libelous flyers about Mr. Dietzel, which devastated his campaign. But I'm not nearly as nice as Paul Dietzel, and I'm not going to allow him to do that to me. I was prepared to engage in a high-level debate and would have done that, but he chose this past week to circulate another scurrilous letter about me, as though he could find something new or different to say about me. But that's the things that I choose now to say about him, because I think you ought to know, and then you can decide for yourself who should go to Congress. Because it's very important, and I want to make sure that I'm accurate, I'm going to choose to do something uncharacteristic of me and read a portion of what I'm now going to say. I want you to know of a conflict of interest that was ignored and why. In 2008, Governor Jindal appointed my opponent to the position of Coastal Advisor, which automatically made him chairman of the Coastal Protection and Recovery Authority. That's the law. At the time, an issue arose about whether it was a conflict of interest because his father, an engineer, had received large contracts from the Corps of Engineers, a partner with CPRA, and it appeared that it might be a conflict of interest for his son to head the authority. His own father said, and this is a quote, "I said from the beginning there was a potential conflict of interest, and apparently that fell on deaf ears." Well, it didn't fall on deaf ears. Governor Jindal, instead of taking the issue to the ethics board, which he should have done, chose instead to have his private lawyer issue an opinion indicating that it was all right. But there's something in that opinion that I want to read to you because it was totally ignored. Here's what he said, speaking to Graves. "But as we agreed, the appropriate solution is that your father's company not pursue an interest in or receive any state contract that involves coastal restoration, levees, or hurricane protection while you serve the administration. This would explicitly include such contracts overseen by DOTD and DNR." Well, in disregard of that prohibition, his father during his tenure received over $130 million worth of contracts. And it gets worse. His father then subcontracted to some 66 subcontractors, construction people and engineers, and gave $66 million to those people in those contracts. It doesn't end there. But it gets more interesting. The dad farmed out $66 million in subcontracts to 18 construction and engineering firms who later give my opponent more than $250,000 for his campaign and $360,000 to generals. See that? Campaign reports. Not mine, that's what they said. That came from over 17 states, including over 500 firms in Virginia, and Maryland, and Washington, D.C. alone. The money came from the Corps of Engineers, where they got it from us. Then it went to Graves' daddy, and then he passed it on to these firms, and then they in turn contributed to Graves and to General. Now, make no mistake about it. This is a scheme by Governor General and Garret Graves to maintain and perpetuate the control and interest they have in the flow of money coming from the Corps of Engineers and the BP oil spill. But it gets worse. They got a grant from BP. They took $160 million of it against the advice of experts, including from LSU, and wasted it on a sand berm project in the Gulf of Mexico, giving the contract to a Florida firm on the recommendations of a firm from the Netherlands. And within a matter of months, as has been predicted, the sand berms were gone, and they wisely then decided they wouldn't spend the rest of the money on the sand berms because that was a waste, and instead would use it to build barrier islands, which is a more prudent use of the money. Well, it gets worse. Later on, they get additional money from BP and decide to build a $35 to $40 million water park complex here to house these industries and these offices that are dealing with coastal restoration. Well, you say that's not such a bad thing, and maybe it isn't. But it involves 1 million square feet of office space, cost $35 to $40 million, and they're going to lease 1 million square feet of office space at probably $25 to $50 a square foot. And you know who happens to be the leasing agent? A fellow named Randy White. And you know who that is? It's Garret Graves' brother-in-law. Now, when you look at what he did for his father and his brother-in-law, I think he's very correct in saying he's a family man. But what about our families? What did we get out of his tenure, spending all that money over all that time? Well, let's talk further. You see this? This is a door hanger that he put out. Look at this. This is what he says about his abilities. He was the senior advisor to Senator David Vitter and Congressman Billy Tozan. Doesn't mention General, who appointed him to the only real position he had where he could spend all this money on his family. But he does mention Vitter and Tozan. And strange enough, the word General is not on this brochure at all. I guess I can't blame him for hiding that, but we need to talk about it. But what does he say here? He was senior advisor to those people on energy, transportation, maritime, defense, trade, and foreign affairs. He was probably able to see the Mexican border from his back porch. And he maybe had a girlfriend in France, and that's a foreign affair. But he also says he was an expert on environmental. Now, that's an adjective, it's not a noun. You can't be an expert on an adjective. But I guess it's understandable when you realize that he never was able to get out of college. Whether he flunked out, was picked out, or just voluntarily got out, I don't know. But he never finished. And if he's elected, it'll be the first time in something like 120 years that we send a congressman from this district who doesn't have a college education. Now let me tell you, you don't need to be college educated to be a congressman. Heaven help me, I hope those people up there recently are not graduates, because I'd be ashamed of what they're doing if they had an education, and more willing to forgive them if they were uneducated. Well, let's go on further. After all that is over with, here comes Graves with the reverse side of his brochure. Here's what he proposes to do. Repeal Obamacare and stop the president's reckless agenda. Promote smaller government and balance the budget. Reduce tax rates and red tape. Close the border and increase deportation. Protect the coastline and sportsman's paradise. Unleash the potential of our energy economy. Defend religious freedoms, life, gun rights, military veterans, and our constitutional rights. Provide traffic and flooding solutions. Hell, if he can do that, I'm going to vote for him. That's the most outlandish claim that I've ever heard a campaign make in any election, and I've been in many elections. It's just unfair that he would try to impose upon the people this ridiculous statement that he's going to do all that. Having said that, we all know on November the 4th, the Republicans swept the country. Practically every Democrat who was running against a Republican lost. Good or bad, it's not the purpose of this conversation. But the Congress of the United States, House and Senate, will be heavily loaded with Republicans. Let me tell you, they don't need my opponent to help them pass their agenda, whatever it is, good or bad. They're going to have their way. And I'm not stupid enough to go over there and fight against the thorns, because I can see the way the wind is blowing. But listen to this. Not everything the National Republican Party proposes and intends to pass is in our interest. And you need a congressman who is aware of how things happen and who can deal with these various congressmen from around the country and try to get some things done to protect our interests. Now listen, if this fellow is afraid to come here and debate this old man, he's going to have a hell of a time when he reaches those 434 other people who are a lot smarter than he is and a lot more capable and who know more about the issue. Let's see. What will he do? No college education, acclaimed expert in all these various things. I noticed, by the way, that he didn't say he was an expert on outer space. He missed that because he's really spaced out. But I'm not making any rash claims. A freshman legislator in Congress, even one with my experience and the fact that I've served there before, is a very small part of the whole thing. All we can do is to try to protect our interests and make things better for the people of Louisiana and the 6th District. And that's what I intend to do. I don't know why all of a sudden this district has become so conservative, except as you look at it, it's been carved out and gerrymandered to where it was deliberately made in a conservative posture. And I recognize that. I knew it when I decided to run, and Trina and I discussed it. But I know a lot of these people. I have no grievance with Republicans generally. They're fine people. Unfortunately, too many of their right-wing members are elected to Congress, and that is what's creating the problem. Now, in the Baton Rouge area, we have a serious problem on Interstate 10, ground level. I've been there, and I've traveled morning and night, and I've witnessed the congestion. It should be taken care of. Now, let me be honest with you. I'm 87 years old. I don't expect anything that I do to end up being completed here in my lifetime. But I have a young wife, and I have a 15-month-old child, and I don't want them to suffer with those conditions for the rest of their lives. I'm going to call a high-level meeting of the governor's office, the mayor's office, the Department of Transportation, planners, traffic planners, and engineers to determine what is the best plan for us to take in order to address the problem. I'll do that within 90 days. And then once we focus on what can and should be done, we'll see about getting it done. Now, our governor turned down a grant from the federal government to study a high-speed transit system between here and New Orleans because he didn't want it to look like Louisiana was part of the United States of America. And he also turned down a grant to provide internet service to the rural areas of our state. Now, that's horrible because internet service is very important to the education of our children and the intercourse of our people with the rest of the nation and the world. And it should have been a thing that he would do it automatically. Garret Graves stood there as Governor General's appointee and never raised his voice in opposition or tried to confront him with his mistaken policies. Make no mistake about it. This is Bobby General, Garret Graves' effort to maintain the control that they have on the funds flowing into the state of Louisiana and especially the 6th District, and they want to be responsible for who ends up getting it. I don't have any family in the business. All the bad things that have been said about me, and there are some, can't point to one time when a member of my family profited from any of my policies or the lack thereof. I'm now going to open for questions because I know some of you are very interested in that, and I may not have covered some subject that is important to you, and I would like to do anything I can with your help to let people know what this is about. So I'll open it up. Yes, sir.
Governor, excuse me. Governor Edwards, as you're aware, the issue of the potential conflict on the contracts was brought up during a forum right prior to the election by Senator Claytor. And Mr. Graves had a pretty hostile reaction to the question even being posed. Do you believe perhaps there may be some chance he passed on today as a result of being unable to confront you directly with it as opposed to when there were 6 or 7 candidates when it may be?
I'm sorry, I really don't follow the question.
Garret Graves, if you'll recall at the forum, when Dan Claytor brought up the potential conflict, he had a very hostile reaction towards Senator Claytor. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that perhaps he may have passed on today's session for fear he couldn't match wits with you in terms of confronting him on that conflict?
Well, here's the deal. Mr. Claytor, Senator Claytor raised the issue. And Garret, in his usual demeanor, jumped up, and his defense was, I never signed off on but one of those contracts. Well, one is one too many, but what he avoided to say, and Senator Claytor didn't point out, is something I'm telling you. In the agreement where he was employed, it was understood that his father would no longer participate as a contractor or an engineer for any of these coastal restored projects and or levees or protection of the coast. Now, all the $130 million that we're talking about were in fact covered by this prohibition, but nobody, because of General's support, ended up questioning it, and it went on during the whole time he was in charge. It's not a question of him signing off, it's a question that they were done while he was in charge. And I don't think we can assume that he sat there idly by and let his father get $130 million in contracts and did nothing about it. But he didn't, because that's what happened. Another example. Unrelated to his position, 2 levee board districts, independent levee board districts, filed a suit against 97 oil and gas companies to determine who was responsible for the damage to the marsh, to what extent, and how it should be paid for. When Governor General found out about it, the word is he went into a hissy and told Graves that needs to be stopped. Graves, of course, although it was not in his jurisdiction and had nothing to do with his position as chairman of the authority, attempted to publicly and otherwise undermine the lawsuit. Didn't succeed. So he and Governor General went to the legislature and got the legislature to pass a bill stopping the lawsuit. Now look, we have damage to the marsh. We need to find out who caused it. We need to find out how to get it repaired. We need to find out what to do. And the best way to do that in the United States of America is to go through the court system. The oil companies, you can rest assured, will be well represented by high-paid counsel. Everybody involved will have lawyers, including the levy district, and the judges will make a decision. I'm not going to say who's responsible. I think I know who's at least in part responsible, but I'm not afraid to find out who is responsible, and I think it's one of the shameful things that Graves and Jindal did together against the interest, where 76% of the people in this district want the lawsuit to proceed because they want to know as I want to know.
Thank you, Governor.
Governor, you referenced some flyer that was allegedly sent on behalf of Graves regarding the diesel campaign. What are you referring to?
Yes, I'm referring to that, and in my opinion, before that came out, Diesel and Graves were running neck and neck, 18, 17, 16% in the poll, and when that came out, it devastated young Diesel's campaign. For some reason, he didn't rise to the ability, or maybe he didn't have the money, but he just didn't do anything. I think he was so stunned at the unfair procedure that he just folded his wings and took his licks. But listen to me carefully. It is the thing that caused Paul Diesel to be ousted from the possibility of being second in the race. And it was scurrilous, and it was unfair, and I thought was subject to innuendos that could neither be proven or disproved, but in campaigns, they really do hurt.
Did you see it?
I saw it. I saw it, and when I saw it, I told my wife, I said, that's going to kill Paul Diesel, and it did. And it was unfair. Now, you know, Paul is a young fellow. This is the first race he's ever been in. I guess it shocked him, but I'm an old soldier. He's going to have a hard time finding a soft spot on my body, because I've had it everywhere all my life, and I'm prepared for it. Just like the letter he sent out to me last week. He didn't want to come to the debate, but he was perfectly willing to use all that money he was getting from his friends and supporters. By the way, you know that half of his campaign contributions come from out of state? In one place alone, 500 different individuals and engineers and construction people sent campaign. When I saw that, I said, what in the world would all those people in all those other areas be so interested in a congressional campaign in Louisiana? It's not as though we're going to end up being Speaker of the House. We're going to be freshman legislators with very little power and very little to do except what our mentality and our ability and our ambition causes us to do. But there they were. The money was there. It's in his financial report.
Can you elaborate on the letter that he sent about you?
What he said about me?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
was it anything that you wanted to respond
What's
to?
what's that?
Is it anything that you wanted to respond to?
Oh, I don't want to respond to it. It's just a rehashing of the old thing. You know me. I don't have any skeletons in my car. They're all out there walking around. He just pointed out what a crook I was, what a bad reputation I had, and my only response is, well, if you're going to have a illegitimate person serving you in Congress, maybe you ought to get one with an education, since your only choice is between the two. And I'm telling you right now, what he did with his father and his brother-in-law is, if not just ethically wrong, it borders on being improper legally.
Have you sought the endorsement of either Diesel or Slater?
No, I don't want to. I would not do that. I would like to have their endorsement, but I think that'd be a burden on them. They're Republicans, and I respect that, and I think they do too. But I'll tell you one thing, and you may quote me. If you know anybody who is a Claytor or a Diesel supporter, before he or she votes, I invite him or her to call Claytor or Diesel and follow his advice. If he tells you to vote for Claytor, then go for it. Vote twice if you can. But if he tells you that Like one fella said, well, I'm gonna vote, but I'm not gonna vote for, wouldn't say he'd vote for me. I'm gonna vote, but I'm not gonna vote for Graves. Well, that kind of leaves me. I figured it's gonna be me. But I'm not saying that either Graves, either Clayton or Diesel said that. I'm saying one more time, I know enough about how they feel about it, because I've been through what they went through. That I would be willing to let the two of them decide the election.
Governor, as you point out, Republicans have the majority. How do you sell being a Democrat going into the minority party? How can that help the district if you're not in the majority that's going to determine committee assignments, committee chairmanships, voting schedule, amendments that actually get hearings? What do you tell somebody you're going to do in a minority party?
The committee chairmanship question is totally irrelevant. It will be years before either of us is given the opportunity to be a chairman. That comes after years of experience and service. The difference is this. If he goes up there being a dedicated Republican, he's going to be in lockstep with whatever they decide, whether it's good for us or not. I'm not a Republican. I'm independent. I'm a Democrat who has his own conscience and his own agenda, and I want to serve the people of this district, not the National Republican Party or the National Democratic Party, because everything those parties recommend and propose, not necessarily in our interest. One of the things is the farm business. The Republicans are all for eliminating all farm subsidies. That would be devastating to the cotton farmers, soybean farmers, rice farmers, and cane farmers. Very important to our economy. And as a Democrat, I would be able to resist the efforts of the Republicans with my colleagues on the Democratic side to form an effective minority and get some balance. Because we may not get all we want, but we won't have to fall in lockstep with whatever they decide we want. We can make our own decisions. And I guarantee you, it'll be better for us than theirs.
I was just going to make a note. I talked to Paul Dietzel about what you mentioned, and it was some pretty outrageous things that Graves was accusing him of.
You talked to Paul Dietzel, and
he told me that he certainly wasn't going to vote for Garret Graves.
well, that leaves me. I'm glad you said that, but I'm not going to suggest that he told me that, because I can't say that. But I know in my heart of hearts, because I know how he felt the day after the election. I know how he felt. I know in my heart of hearts that he realizes that Graves did him a dirty deal, and it was. And I know that he is not going to forget it and should not. But I just hope, young as he is, he counts it up and chalks it off as a bad experience, and that later on in life he goes on to some other opportunity and maybe come out a little bit better, because I think he has much to offer. And while he has a lot to learn, he also has much to offer. And at least he has a college education.
Been a lot of
Remember, now, we
discussion.
go back a long way.
What's that?
Remember, we go back a long way.
I know. This is a good question for you to answer, or say whatever you feel like. There's a lot of discussion on both sides about the actions of
Come on up a
President.
little bit.
There's a lot of discussion on both sides about the action this past week by President Obama. Was he acting constitutionally? What do you feel about the action on immigration that he took?
I have to assume with his legal advice, he must think he's acting constitutionally. I don't agree with that, but I don't know. But I'll say this. The U.S. Senate some time ago passed a bipartisan bill, Democrats and Republicans, which addressed the issue of immigration. The Republican-controlled House of Representatives refused to even vote on it. Had they done that and passed the bipartisan bill passed by their own legislators, Republican legislators in the Senate, we would not be in the stalemate we are now. Now, the immigration problem is a very serious one, and he's not going to solve it with a slick piece of paper, I can tell you that right now. But I think this, just wait. In 2 months, the Republicans will be in charge of everything. And I say to them, okay, come up with a plan. We all agree it's an issue and it should be addressed. Let's see what you're suggesting. To me, number one, secure the border. Everybody agrees with that. Number two, those 50,000 children that are here improperly, they all have brothers, siblings, or parents, or friends who can adopt them and provide them with an education and later on a job and make responsible citizens out of them. Let's open the doors and let them adopt those kids if they can get them, okay? Those that can't, we need to send back to the countries from whence they came. And we make those countries pay for that cost. How do we do that? All of those countries get millions of dollars in credits and aid from us every year. Just deduct it from what we would otherwise send them, and we get it paid for. As to those 12 million people now in this country who have no criminal record, who have responsible families, and who are paying their fair share of taxes and working, we need to develop, say, a 5-year plan, maybe 6, maybe 4, but a 5-year plan, a road to citizenship. Give them the opportunity. Stay out of trouble, continue working, pay your taxes, take care of your family, learn English, and learn something about America, and in due course, you'll be given a citizenship. We cannot, although it sounds wonderful to say we're going to ship 12 million people back to the country from which they come from, the cost and the damage to humanity doing that is just unconscionable. It's just not going to happen. And we need to recognize that and quit spouting about how we're going to send them all back to Mexico or wherever they came from. They didn't all come from Mexico. They came from dozens of countries. And we need to recognize that many farmers would not be able to get their vegetables and fruits picked without the aid of these Mexican laborers. Many contractors who are builders would not be able to complete buildings without the aid of the Mexican workers who are working for them. They're the kind of people that are doing jobs that most people in America just don't want to do. And we need to have some concern for the employers who are going to be damaged by this abrupt action if it ever came about. But it's a problem, and I just hope that this Republican-controlled Congress next year will address it and give us something, even if it's not what I want. Let's get the issue addressed. All right, thank you.
How is your campaign or your race affected by the Senate race?
Affected who?
Affected by the Senate race being on the ballot at the same time?
It's hard to tell. I suppose that both Mary and I would be better off if Obama died tomorrow. I'm not wishing that. In a way it helps because Mary's making an effort to get the vote out, and I can assume that most of her voters would also vote for me in this district. On the other hand, she is a lightning rod because of her relationship with the president. And although the president is not on the ballot, as you like to say, and I say he's not on the ballot, at least in my case, they can't point a finger about me supporting him or doing anything for him or being one of his legislators. I'm innocent. I've never said that long. I had nothing to do with it. During most of his tenure, I was in prison. They didn't even let me vote. You were saying?
Do you expect a higher turnout could help your campaign? Turnout was terrible in November.
I expect about the same. In a lot of areas there are unsettled local elections, and that's going to stimulate the vote. But if I were to guess, I'd say it'd probably be a few points smaller than the first election.
Governor, can you tell us when we might see some TV ads from you?
What's that?
Can you tell us when we might see a TV ad from you? A TV ad?
When will you run a
Oh.
TV ad?
Sorry.
I think starting Tuesday, but early next week. And we'll also be on the radio during the week. And we have much Twitter and Facebook and a number of scheduled meetings. I got where I am now without spending, I know you folks don't like to hear this, without spending any money on television or radio, because I didn't think it was necessary. I mean, what can you do except try to convince people who you are? But I must say that to the benefit of my opponent, he made a very effective use of late television, which was all puff and not really any substance, but nevertheless, I thought it was very effective, and obviously, when you look at the returns, it was effective, because prior to that, he was hovering in the late, early teens and low digits in the polls, but all of a sudden, he began to catch up, and he did a good job in that regard. But now he's run out of steam, he's got nothing more to crow about, and he's now have to face the issues.
We have a lower unemployment rate. The Dow is higher than it's ever been. We killed Osama, and we're withdrawing our troops from overseas. So what's wrong with that picture?
Obama. If it was anybody else, they'd be clapping and cheering. But they refuse to give him credit for what he has done and accomplished. Now, not all his accomplishments, not all his fault, blah, 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 but nevertheless, he was the president, and things, in many ways, have gotten much better during his tenure. But I'm afraid that too many people look at the color of his skin rather than the quality of his programs. And that's unfortunate. Having said that, Louisiana in particular, in spite of the kind of governor we have, we've done very well. But there's a reason for it, and that is we have natural gas, which is an abundant supply. We have the Mississippi River, we have petrochemical industries, and we have two of the largest boat builders in America, Baton Rouge and Quest, and they employ thousands of people. And that, we have a good farm economy, which is done very well, in part based on democratic foreign policies, and that we as a state are doing much better than many other states, and I'm very proud of that. But I don't know how Governor Jindal can claim credit for it. I'm sure you will.
You mentioned the I-10 problem, the Interstate 10 problem. What are some of your other priorities as if you're elected to the Congressional District?
What do I think about it?
You mentioned the Interstate 10 problem and addressing it. What are some of your other priorities?
Well, from a standpoint of infrastructure, it's my first priority, because it needs to get started. And I'm a proponent of an elevated expressway over the interstate, leaving the ground level interstate for people who need to do business or travel or live in Baton Rouge, and the elevated expressway for those simply wanting to trans east to west or west to east across Baton Rouge. Much to my surprise, many of the traffic planners I've been talking to and engineers seem to think that a tunnel under the interstate would be cheaper and more effective. I tell you, as a Cajun fellow with webbed feet, I don't understand that, but that's what they're suggesting. But there's also the possibility of a northwest bypass from around Marigon, west of here, on Interstate 10, crossing over a new bridge over the river and connecting again to Interstate 10 at around Sorrento. But those are all long distance plans. I don't know which one is the most feasible, but I want to find out, and I want to get started. And I hope that sometime in your lifetime, you'll have the opportunity to get the benefits of it. And you would say, well, one time in my life, I benefited from politicians. I didn't know it at the time, but I did.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Garret Graves has agreed to debate you once in Denham Springs.
What's that? He's agreed
Garret
to
Graves
debate
debate.
again.
Will you be as forceful in your showdown with him week?
Well, probably more so, because I'm the kind of fellow, I don't like to talk about people in their absence, although it's his fault he's absent, both here and physically. But and I hope he shows up for the debate, because I want to propound these questions to him, and I want to make these statements and give him an opportunity to respond. Okay, don't tell me it's okay that your daddy got all that money because you didn't sign off on it. You were prohibited from letting him have that, regardless of who signed on it. What's your explanation? What about your brother-in-law? How did he suddenly become the leasing agent for this giant complex that you're building in Baton Rouge. You know, you're talking about 1 million square feet of office space at say $25 to $50 a square foot. That's $25 to $50 million, and let's say 2 or 3% leasing fees, commissions. You're talking about over $1 million a year. Everybody should have a brother-in-law like that. Anybody else? Well, it's early voting. You have a few more days. And anyhow, I wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving and a holy and peaceful Christmas season. As for me, I plan on making plans to move to Washington, D.C. Thank you.